Welcome back. If this is your first time here, then welcome. This is the third entry in a series where I take a look at box sets of old horror and science fiction films, to see if I can find any good ones. I didn't have much luck with the science fiction box set, but maybe this one is a little more curated. What I've got here is a collection of... Yeah, you gotta hold this thing from the bottom. Anyways, what I've got here is an oddly specific collection of mad scientist movies. While the set boasts it has 50 movies, 20 of these films have been ones I've already covered in my horror and science fiction box set videos, which conveniently leaves us with only 30 movies to look at. While the oddly specific theming means we're going to be seeing a lot of repeat character archetypes, namely the mad scientist, it also means that it's justified to have both horror and science fiction movies in this collection, because there's a little bit of crossover with both. As for trigger warnings, well, these are older movies. Older horror movies, even. You should know what you're getting into. I will say some of the movies here are more of the exploitation variety, so expect weirder subject matters and more gore. I want to give a quick disclaimer. If the footage from a movie I review looks good, that's because I ripped it from another source. The collective visual quality of the films in this collection is, without a doubt, some of the worst I've ever seen. Sure, the transfers didn't look good in the prior sets I looked at, but something must have happened over at Mill Creek because the digital tearing on some of these already faded prints makes them look even worse. Anyways, I will be looking at 10 movies per video. There will be 3 parts. And I picked and placed the movie order in a way where I saved the best for last. Let's start with a heavy hitter. Directed by Robert Wiene, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is a silent German film released in 1920, and it stands as one of the horror genre's most influential entries. While horror movies existed before this one, and macabre, spooky elements have been used in films in the past, it's safe to say this is the first surviving horror film to attempt an atmosphere while codifying elements that would later become tropes. Caligari is very much the great-great-grandfather of all modern horror. Presented by an unreliable narrator, the film is about a carnival performer named Caligari, whose main attraction, a sleepwalking man named Cesar, is used by the Doctor to murder people. Caligari's motivations are manic and unpredictable. The first victim of Cesar is a town clerk who is rude to the Doctor, and the second is a man Cesar predicts will die at dawn. It's some sick way he's concerned about keeping up appearances. The somnambulist, a pale-looking guy in simple all-black apparel, is the progenitor of so much horror iconography. This guy has a body count and makes occasional use of a knife, making him one of cinema's first slasher villains. He walks in a slow, trance-like state, evoking the imagery of a zombie. He falls in love with a woman and carries her off while she's unconscious, a direct inspiration for numerous monster movies to follow shortly after. Under all that makeup too, he's also one of cinema's first goth guys, before that was even a thing. The imagery of this film is a product of the German Expressionist art movement, which this film is often pointed to as a major example of. The environments of Caligari make heavy use of painted shadow, warped, angular architecture, and the characters have accentuating makeup that emphasizes their features. To match, the performances of this film are hyper-exaggerated, to a degree that works in a silent film, and also indicates that they're not completely there mentally. It adds to the surreal yet manic vibe the film is going for, and that's what I mean by it attempting an atmosphere. It's not always clear what characters are doing, but they're sure as heck acting the hell out of it. Even the film's structure is atypical, as it's separated into 6 acts as opposed to a standard 3. And the film's title and dialogue cards are eccentric and match the warped environments. The surreal reality is never commented on by the characters, it's just the world they live in. And for reasons that are justified by the film's ending, which I won't spoil even though this movie is over 100 years old. Jesus Christ, everyone in this movie is dead. You've probably figured it out by now because it's such a cliche, but I can buy its use as a twist for a movie that came out before it was even a cliche yet. Hell, this could have been the origin of it. It's also one of those movies where the twist recontextualizes everything that came before it, so it benefits from a second watch. If you're gonna watch this one, and I actually recommend you do, it should be through the numerous high-quality restorations that have been done of the film. The transfer of Caligari, found on the Mad Scientist collection, is a smeary mess with washed-out and blurry visuals. I can't even read half of the English inserts. It's highly interpretational, slow in a good way, and most importantly, eerie. It's not only a highly influential film, but also a pretty darn good one for its time. Here's something a little sillier. Released during the golden age of science fiction, The Head is a 1959 German film, dubbed in English on the set, of course.
We shall have to go ahead without him.
The plot goes as such. With the help of a Serum Z, Dr. Abel, a brilliant scientist, has his head preserved against his will by a newly hired mad scientist, Dr. Ood.
That left me only one last chance. And that was to perform the dog operation on your head.
This is only the initial setup, however, as Dr. Ood is more dead set on giving Abel's hunchbacked assistant a new body. 117 days later, apparently, the operation is a success, but the assistant immediately realizes something is wrong. She wasn't told that her head was being put on a completely different body. Man, there were a lot of transplant movies around this time, with the premise and the scenes of cabaret dancers dancing in front of suits of armor? Okay, whatever, gets your rocks off. Anyways, with this premise and the scenes of the mad scientist going around looking for sexy ladies to kidnap for the operation, the film reminds me a lot of The Brain That Wouldn't Die, though this is a marginally better movie. In the past, I've complained about the persistent white noise in early sound films adding to the boredom, but here I think the moments of silence actually add to the atmosphere. Somewhat. The scene where the hunchback lady, Irene, awakens from her operation is also a little spooky. Despite these admirable attempts at atmosphere, there are points where the more questionable elements hamper the experience. There's this device that Dr. Abel made that hands out surgical tools on command, and it's clearly people behind a wall pushing the tools out. It's pretty funny. Also, I mean, the imagery of a head on a table isn't terribly convincing, but it's just a concept I personally find too silly to be frightening.
No, I don't want to be seen like this.
The dialogue is also quite clunky at points, though I wonder if this is more of a problem with the dub than anything. It's incredibly on-the-nose stuff.
I want to do a head of you, may I?
The plot is barely about the titular head, too. For a long time, the movie is more about Dr. Ood's crazy head-swapping experiment with Irene, so the screenplay here is rather confused about what it wants to focus on. I thought this movie was about a head on a table. This guy is also weirdly accepting of Irene having his old girlfriend's body. Like, yeah, he didn't really like his old girlfriend that much, but he comes off as creepier than the mad scientist.
Now you have a normal body. You can fall in love. You'll be like everyone else.
Implying people with deformities can't experience love. There's also some gross Stockholm syndrome with Dr. Ood, and yeah, this is suitably uncomfortable. I mean, this is a horror movie after all, but it's not in the fun way, you know? It's not like a fun little horror movie thing. It's just kind of weird and creepy. That said, this movie is a little better than I expected. There are times where its slow pacing actually works, delivering some mildly spooky scenes. But everything involving the head is half-baked, and the head-swapping stuff the movie is more interested in focusing on isn't that interesting. This is very much a movie that named itself after what amounts to a subplot. Occasionally eerie, but mostly just silly. Check it out for some cheap thrills.
Shut up! Mad, yes, you're mad.
I am not mad! No, I am not mad!
Yeah, I want to get one of these movies out of the way in the first part. You know the ones. Produced by a Poverty Row studio, released in the 30s. I've covered many of these before. They dominate these box sets because the copyright on them has lapsed. I won't knock the hustle of making a movie, but ones like these are more than a chore to sit through. That said, I don't think I've ever exclaimed, "What?" or "Who's this character?" or what the hell is happening? This much in a 48-minute experience since Beast of Yucca Flats. This is a demonstrably better movie than that one, but I think it might just be more confusing. According to IMDb, the plot reads, a mad scientist performs experiments on the criminal mind on captured criminals on board his private ship. I mean, I can see that. Characters here are just suddenly introduced. Like, seriously, our introduction to these two women involved in a poison ring is this hard cut to one of them holding a gun on the other. There's a serial killer that's dropped into the plot with no build-up. We don't know what the doctor is doing for a very long time. And to top it all off, this movie just starts. After the credits, it hard cuts to this gang of mobsters planning on taking over the ship. It's like we jumped into the second act and completely skipped the first. IMDb and other sources list this movie as being 57 minutes, which it isn't. Or is it? I did some minor sleuthing, and as it turns out, the version of the film that can be found on streaming services and this box set is missing a good chunk of footage. The footage from an uncut version of the film actually explains several questions I have. The reason why it felt like the first act of the film was missing was because the first act of the film was actually missing. The truncated version cut out the first 16 minutes. All of it is important setup for the rest of the film. In this version, we get the explanation in the first scene that the scientist is in the midst of a trial for his experiments, which seek to, quote, cure criminality, unquote, by manipulating the endocrine gland.
Doctor, is it true that through your experiments in the endocrine glands you can cure crime?
Yeah, what about this crime cure?
He's escaping on the titular torture ship to continue his experiments and avoid his court date. He's still making criminals even more insane, so, doing a bang-up job there. Kind of a dumb character. The serial killer that's inexplicably revealed to be on the ship is properly set up with this newspaper headline here. In fact, all of the characters are properly introduced that way. These characters all converge on the ship because the doctor is going to experiment on them. Many kudos to this YouTuber for posting the uncut version online. It helped answer the numerous questions I had, and it also gave me more to talk about. Because unfortunately, I don't have much to say about the film itself. It's an average dime-a-dozen cheapo thriller like many of the others at this time. For what it's worth, the cast here is decent. They're delivering this absurd material the best they can.
I'd be tickled to death to give you a shave.
Well, thank you, Harry.
And some of these lines actually landed for me.
You know how to swim, Ritter?
Yeah, a little why?
Well, you're due for a good long one if you don't get out of here quick.
Okay, baby.
I feel like the fact that it was directed by the guy who did White Zombie, Victor Halperin, helps. There are still a number of contrivances. This gang of hardened criminals is taken down by two guys. The mad scientist is a fucking goofy character. He claims to be curing people of their criminality, but just keeps making them worse. It does eventually end up working, and that resolution is pretty silly.
It's funny, but I want to give myself up now.
For a thriller, the film isn't very thrilling. It never really clicks. I was mostly bored throughout, sans the initial intrigue of learning there was a longer cut.
As you know, I've obtained in this, synthetically, the active ingredients of the endocrine glands governing criminality.
Yeah, it's not as awful as the truncated edit would have you believe, but it's not very good either. I'm glad that I saw it uncut to give it a fairer shake. The movie ends with a foreign man planning to swim back to his home country.
You think you can make it?
Hilarious. Next movie. Lady Frankenstein is a slightly truncated, definitely pan and scanned English dub of an Italian production, at least on this DVD set. It's very much chasing the same trend of sex and violence as the Hammer Frankenstein movies, but it's nowhere near as good. The daughter of Frankenstein, Tanya, has just arrived home from university after becoming a licensed surgeon. Turns out she has the same radical ideas as her dad, and she wants to help him create another monster. After her dad is killed by the monster, Tanya vows to create her own monster to kill the other one.
How can somebody so lovely be such a bitch?
It honestly goes off the fucking rails. She's attracted to the brain of this guy, Marshall, but she's also attracted to the body of this mentally disabled guy, Thomas. So she swaps their bodies and it makes Marshall, in Thomas's body, absurdly strong for some reason. I'm fairly certain that's not how the human body works, but whatever, silly science fiction and whatnot. But still, how is this supposed to clear her father's name? If anything, she had to kill a man to make this brain transplant work. What she does is debatably more detestable than her father. This is all happening as the monster is running around the countryside killing people, so it's very much a weird divergence in the plot. The guy playing Frankenstein is Joseph Cotten, a quite prolific actor who appeared in movies like Citizen Kane. Unfortunately, he doesn't bring his A-game here, at least not in this dubbed version of himself.
Such a grotesque dream.
He's extremely wooden in this role. Just compare the performance of Colin Clive with his when the monster is revived. It's like night and day.
Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
He's alive.
Sure, he's killed in the first 35 minutes, but you're stuck with that performance until then. The Frankenstein monster also looks not great. You'd think Frankenstein would have cleaned this guy up before putting a brain in him. Also to make sure they weren't using the brain of a murderer, I don't know. There's a reason why Frankenstein told Fritz to get a normal brain in the Universal movie. This whole experiment was doomed to fail. This version seems to have been cut down. Several minutes are missing from the longer version. And cuts like these don't hide the removed content very well.
Nice, cheerful place you have here, Lynch.
The weird soundscape that usually accompanies Italian productions due to them not recording on-set audio does aid in the atmosphere of this production. It's all very surreal and alien. It kinda works. It is delightfully cliché, too. Plenty of miscellaneous shots of lab equipment, beakers boiling, the monster is assembled through classic methods, bats surround it for some reason during the resurrection scene. It's classic stuff, and the sets look decent. It tries to sex up the material to pretty unsexy results, though. This definitely isn't a good movie, but I did find it enjoyable at times. The sound design is delightfully pulpy. The plot gets derailed into this schlocky brain-swapping story that's at the very least intriguing. And some of the scenes with the shitty monster walking around killing people are funny. It does have a strange, watchable vibe to it. I can see how this could be a cult classic. Despite starring a semi-prolific cast of television actors like Robert Vaughn, The Lucifer Complex is a film so obscure it doesn't even have a Wikipedia page. Apparently filmed in 1976 and remaining unreleased until 1978 when it was shown on television, I frankly think it should have stayed shelved. I did not enjoy this one at all.
What about the Lucifer problem?
The plot goes like this. A secret agent named Manning uncovers a conspiracy to bring back leaders of the demonetization police through cloning. And that includes everyone's least favorite mustached man. Mario, of course.
Too bad the old boy isn't around to see it.
Now the film starts in the worst way possible. We're first introduced to this guy living on an island. And our first impression is that he mumbles a lot.
Came by to watch me work, huh?
20 minutes go by, and so much of it is spent making grumbly, doomer observations about the evolution of humanity and technology. Minutes upon minutes upon minutes of these ramblings go by, and it's all just spent looking at stock footage. It's one of the worst openings to a movie I've ever seen, and it only gets marginally better from here. In fact, in an act of cruelty, this guy is the framing device. We watch the entire movie from his perspective because he somehow has footage of everything that happened. The framing device adds nothing. The actual plot of the film is some mildly amusing schlock. I wouldn't call it good, but it is reasonably watchable. Slow at times, not good enough to justify its length, but not as bad as the framing device would have you believe. The plot is a somewhat entertaining blend of science fiction and espionage. Now, something a lot of Bond ripoffs and even a couple Bond films struggle with is casting the right actor. You want someone who can be suave and charming. If you don't cast the right person or write the wrong kind of dialogue, then you get a lot of...
You're going to teach me belly dancing?
Muscles.
creepy vibes. There's some dumb overacting here.
You dirty rotten!
German soldier. But yeah, it's still not a good movie. The framing device really drags this one down. Because it starts in a post-apocalypse, the plot leading up to that outcome should be interesting. You know, to keep the suspense going. But it's just not fun. It's too hokey. The flick is a bore.
He is a fine-looking specimen, isn't he?
It doesn't help that the transfer of this film looks and sounds like garbage, more so than the others I've looked at so far. The audio is muffled and sometimes the high-pitched humming can be heard. The telecine is not only low quality, but digital tearing can be seen throughout. I've seen movie bootlegs that are on par with or better than how this movie looks. The Lucifer Complex is a slog. It has some funny bits, but I don't recommend it.
We are the master race.
Getting another one of these out of the way in the first video. It's another Poverty Row feature from the 30s, this time with Bela Lugosi once again being in a role he is overqualified for. This one, Shadow of Chinatown, is an edited down version of a 4-hour-long serial. Now, the last time I talked about a movie that was cut down this tremendously, I pointed out how truncated it felt. This also feels like it's cutting down on 4-hour-long material. What, you thought I was going to say that it didn't? This one is a little more fun at least. Out of fear of Asian businesses overtaking domestic production, an evil lady in a china dress instructs the scientist, played by Bela Lugosi, to do what he can to disrupt businesses in Chinatown. This includes getting a bunch of people to pretend to be Chinese. It was a different time. They do cast a handful of Asian actors in the film, but one of them is a stereotyped house servant.
If Chinese merchants suspend business, logical thought indicates much profit accrued to evil rivals.
It was a different time. The acting in this one, from this lady in particular, is very cartoony.
I must get a sensational story and get it quick.
And often stilted.
When can you begin on this?
Bela Lugosi can be entertaining here too. He's doing what I think are supposed to be the same intimidating stares that made his Dracula performance so noteworthy. It's much hokier here though.
You are going to leave Grogan.
While the editing here leaves a bit to be desired, there are some mildly amusing action scenes here. Some pretty solid stunts. Like this scene where this guy swings through a window on a telephone wire, or the actress for the reporter lady tries to bring down a scaffold. The latter one would have been done by a stunt double these days, maybe cut to a close-up of the actress but have a stunt double in the wide, but nope, that's the actress doing that stunt. But yeah, I didn't really care for this one. It was a very passive watch. It's old, there's some creepy undercurrent of racism. I'd like to move on. Now, despite sharing the name with George Romero's Living Dead series, House of the Living Dead bears no relation. In fact, it's a 1976 South African film that has nothing to do with zombies. The name is a total tease. If anything, it's about the completely dead, as in ghosts, spirits. The movie starts out with a bit of promise, a bit of intrigue. Before a title sequence set inside a nice little lab set, there's a scene where a hooded figure stuffs a raging ape into a sack. A man passes by in a horse. Another watches from a nearby house. How do all these disparate elements relate to each other? The movie beckons you to find out. I like that. Unfortunately, the first 90 seconds are as good as it gets. This murky, mumbly little movie is a period piece, taking place on a South African plantation, and it follows... well, it follows a couple things. There's a deranged mad scientist named Breck experimenting on isolating and removing the soul from the body, his hypothesis being that the soul is an organic entity, whatever that means. There are also themes of witchcraft and voodoo sprinkled throughout. There's also something in there about the owners of the plantation not being allowed to marry out of fear of continuing their legacy, as Michael, one of the plantation owners, brings over his fiancée and complicates things with his mother. It's all a bit rambling with all the domestic drama thrown into the mix. At times it doesn't even feel like horror or even science fiction. It's more akin to a dry murder mystery with some spooky stuff tacked on. It only ever goes full horror in the last 14 minutes, and the stuff leading up to it isn't all that compelling.
Did you lock my door last night, Lena?
No.
Thank God there's a higher quality version of this movie on YouTube, or else I'd be completely lost here. The transfer on the Mill Creek set is, once again, rancid. I can barely see what's happening during the night scenes. The drama with the fiancé is utterly uninteresting. I don't really buy these characters due to their somewhat stilted delivery, and the script could have used a couple rewrites. I'm also just not a fan of this particular setting. It's not awful, it has some mildly creepy moments. Hell, even the ending has a couple cool things going for it. Though the final moments amount to a guy stumbling around being scared of invisible things making noises at him. It's definitely not an underrated classic. I didn't like it. Next movie. Another Poverty Row film. The Devil Bat is a movie starring Bela Lugosi. I actually touched upon this one a little in a previous video that highlighted the film's monster, but I'll go into the actual film a little more here. The movie concerns a mad scientist, shocking, I know, who is offered a pittance despite his chemistry making the company he works for millions of dollars. In an act of revenge, he develops an electronic device that enlarges bats, and he sends them to attack his enemies. Honestly, he was totally justified in doing this. His employers were assholes.
You're a dreamer, Doc. Too much money is bad for dreamers.
Keep in mind he's a physician and chemist, so leaping from that profession to making giant bats is almost like a completely separate career path. He does use his background as a chemist to give his enemies makeup that the bat uses to target them. It doesn't stop there. This is the noise the bat makes when it kills people. Fucking comedy.
What is that squeaky sound? Oh, just some night noise.
The cast in this one is full of goofballs.
Say, have you ever had a date with a girl?
A girl? Oh, yes, a girl. I believe I did take a girl out once.
There's the overzealous cameraman named One Shot McGuire. Everyone aside from Lugosi talks in that sort of sing-songy transatlantic 40s speak. Everyone is wearing a business suit, and Lugosi seems to just be having a good time with this. There's just something likably antiquated about the whole thing. I can't be mad at this.
How did you develop a monster bat like that?
You wouldn't understand scientific theory.
Even when the film is clearly wasting the viewer's time, there's a scene early on when Lugosi is experimenting on the Devil Bat and he stops in the middle of it to adjust a knob, then starts it up again. It's a pointless little moment, but it's there to pad out the runtime. The close-ups of the Devil Bats, yes, bats plural, one of them dies, is that of a fruit bat. But promotional material and even the title card suggest a vampire bat was the intended design of the creature. That's just so funny. They wanted something fearsome and ugly, but ended up using the wrong footage and got something cute. Compared to other Poverty Row features, this one is actually a little better than what I'm used to. Despite some of the aforementioned pacing issues, it's very watchable. It's not a bad way to spend an hour. -2.
Imbecile. Bombastic ignoramus.
Bombastic ignoramus. That's a new one. Another movie from the 30s. This one is under 50 minutes. Okay, not actually. It's another film that was unfortunately truncated at some point.
Father.
With all the awkward sounds cutting out, it suggests that someone kept bumping into the telecine.
Hello.
But here's what the movie is about. The mad scientist of this film is a Russian named Dr. Boris Karlov, no relation. and he's taking revenge against the nobles for the suicide of his daughter. While I wouldn't call this one an underrated classic, this movie has a couple things going for it. The use of shadows for the horror scenes is quite effective. The set design here has some eccentric choices. The door to Karloff's room has his name engraved on it, like he's an 8-year-old, and this lady's room has a copy of the Mona Lisa in it, which is not impossible, but also just kind of weird, I don't know. But generally, the sets here work.
I let your man lead me to you so that I could do this.
I love the acting here. Everyone has that transatlantic 30s speak. It's hokey, but very endearing too. It's like they think they're in a stage production, and they have to, speak to the crowd. In fact, I'd say waiting for the next weird line read was what kept me going.
Oh, now look here, my boy. You've got to realize we're dealing with a madman.
But yeah, this one wasn't that bad. It's a little slow and repetitive with all the scenes of people in rooms talking, but there was enough happening to keep me engaged. All the film's eccentricities make it a funny little time capsule. Not an underrated classic by any means, but it's watchable. Maybe don't watch it on this DVD set, though. The misleadingly titled The Revenge of Dr. X is an American/Japanese co-production released in 1970. The film's original title was Venus Flytrap, and a probable explanation as to why this print looks like dog shit is because it was apparently found in a warehouse. This same source also explains that the ill-fitting title was actually meant for another film, but the credits to that film were incorrectly spliced into the opening of this film. Utterly bizarre situation here.
And get those things out of my sight!
Professor Bragan is a rocket scientist/botanist, and after an explosion of temper that results in him passing out, he's recommended a trip to Japan to cool off. Before he leaves, he takes with him a Venus flytrap, which are apparently a thing in North Carolina. I didn't know that. A whole 50 minutes go by as he fucks around with his assistant and collects various plant parts, and this eventually culminates in the creation of a humanoid monster made of plants. Why did he do this?
They might destroy my proof of the real basis of human evolution.
Complete bullshit. So, this one has one of the strangest crossovers of talent I've seen yet. The film's screenplay was written by an uncredited Ed Wood Jr. As in, focus of a Tim Burton movie, Ed Wood Jr. And the film was distributed and partially contributed to by Toei. So if you thought the monster in this looks like something out of Kamen Rider, that's because it probably is. I mean, Kamen Rider wouldn't start airing until a year after this film was released. It's definitely got the same design principles as the monsters in the show, a humanoid shape with a theme to it. That theme being plants. Weird connection aside, I had to watch this one in a group.
Legitimate question, what genre is this? The genre it feels is just people walking around.
That's what a lot of this shit is, let me tell you.
It's so fucking dry and unexciting, it needed the company.
What if there were plants and they were people?
Wow, that's crazy.
Now that you have seen what you have seen, can you deny the fact that there may be truth that you do not know?
Shots are constantly framed awkwardly, which may be because this is a pan and scan of a film shot in widescreen. But there's enough incompetence in the film's other elements that suggests this was also an accident. The characters here are utterly uninteresting, and that's ignoring the fact that it was this Japanese actress's first acting gig.
You did your best.
Apparently my best hasn't been good enough.
We spend so much time with them, and they don't say or do anything interesting or charismatic. And I swear, Bragan's actor is drunk in every take.
I was to study the relationship between the giant sequoia in California and
the giant sequoia, okay.
He's so
French.
Oh boy, it's hitting him hard.
He took one sip.
Yeah, on that take.
Fucking lightweight.
The French champagne.
There's this ridiculous sequence almost halfway through the film where Bragan rides a car down a mountain, gets in another car to get to another location, then rides a taxi to a museum, The entire process is so comedically obtuse, and I suspect this was one of the plot beats left in from Ed Wood's draft, because it's a level of absurdity consistent with his work.
Okay.
Oh, thank oh my god, I thought he was gonna...
Oh my god.
Getting another
Another one, what?
Is this like scene
is he
of getting
being
into
tailed
a
by the
car,
cops?
driving to another car, driving to another car?
There definitely isn't enough of the monster here. Sure, you want to build up to something like this or show it sparingly, but again, the characters don't justify that choice. I don't care about what these planks of wood have to say. There's this creepy little guy living in the house Bragan and his lady friend are staying at, and you think he's gonna do something. He has a musical leitmotif of toccata and fugue in D minor.
Then why can't it be human?
But he doesn't do anything, and he's killed by the monster in an unceremonious way. There's a scene with naked ladies on the beach, and it's like, wow, okay, I guess we're doing gratuitous nudity now? But it's also the only surprising moment in the film. The music is migraine-inducing, the script is ridiculous, the pacing with all the horrible driving scenes is glacial, the acting is generally lethargic, and the monster is unimpressive. I definitely wouldn't recommend this one. If you've got 94 minutes to spare and a friend group willing to indulge in it, it can be a blast. It sure was for me.
Hey, watch this in VR if you want to give yourself a concussion.
Oh, no.
We aren't halfway through.
Oh, well, how far are we in?
We are 38 minutes.
Oh, we've just now reached the half-hour point.
But I absolutely would not recommend a solo viewing.
What? Oh, what?
Yes.
Yes. Wait, what happened?
That's a real shot. That's an actually cool shot.
The goat lived.
Oh hey, it's the movie with the guy on the cover. The Ape Man is another Bela Lugosi film from the 40s. So the movie starts with a mystery that's almost immediately solved, with the disappearance of a professor quickly being explained by his colleague as a cover to hide the fact that he injected himself with a serum that's slowly turning him into an ape. Why the professor wanted to do this, I have no idea. They might have explained why, but the dialogue is so muffled, it's a struggle trying to figure out what these characters are saying half the time.
All houses are haunted. All Christmas.
Well, whatever they're saying, I figured that Brewster, the Ape Man, is trying to regain his human form, so he goes around taking human spinal fluid to return to normal, with the help of his gorilla friend. Surprisingly, not the first ape-themed movie to involve spinal fluid as a plot element. He only needs one injection of it to return to his human posture, but it wears off and he's forced to go on a killing spree.
Get Liverpool. Fortunate, no one but one of your own.
The movie starts with Lugosi already transformed into an ape, and I feel like it was a missed opportunity to explore the events leading up to that. Why the hell did he want to do it in the first place? What was he trying to prove? What dialogue I can make out is incredibly hokey, though there is a tinge of intentional comedy to the whole thing, though I don't find it funny. The other characters in the film are reporters trying to figure out what's going on with Brewster, and we, the audience, already know what the deal is with him, so whenever it cuts back to them, it results in some tedious scenes. Spoilers for the Ape Man, I guess. But the ending is hysterical.
Don't you over my knee and paddle you good. Don't be a chump. Who are you anyway? Me? Oh, I'm the author of the story. Screwy idea, wasn't it?
And then it ends with an ad for war bonds. Just absolutely incredible. The highlight of the movie for sure. It's a bit plotting despite its hour-long length, and the characters are paper-thin, and the science is preposterous even by science fiction standards. It's a hokey little adventure that doesn't excite, but I've definitely seen worse. Next movie.
I don't care, I'm going.
Oh hey, it's a movie from Jerry Warren. The same psychopath responsible for The Incredible Petrified World. And that was one of the worst movies on the last box set I looked at. His name is the first frame of the movie too, so, I wasn't looking forward to the rest of it. So these dweeby teenagers travel out to an island where a lady scientist is turning people into zombies for an unnamed, presumably communist nation. She also has a gorilla.
I think you'll agree this one has plenty of fight in him.
So she captures the teens, and it's up to their extra dweeby friend and his girlfriend to save them. Because it seems like a law in this movie that every male must have a girlfriend. Please procreate. There's this sequence early on where the extra dweeby teen and his girlfriend travel to the island, and it takes an excruciatingly long time. And then they're told to leave and are like, okay, and then they do.
Well, goodbye.
It's infuriating because of how long it took to friggin' get there in the first place. And that's just one example of the tedium that is this film's pacing. So much of this film is padded out by scenes of the characters walking or driving somewhere. I'm sure if you cut it out of the movie, it would at least be 5 minutes shorter. Every second counts when it's spent doing nothing. Combine that with some stilted acting and uninteresting camera work and blocking, and you have a rather lethargic viewing experience. It's another incredibly dull, unexciting, and boring movie. It's not so bad it's good, it's just terrible. I know I didn't say much, but there honestly isn't that much to say. At least nothing I haven't already said about movies like this. This is so bad it would be right at home on the science fiction box set. I want to move on to more interesting movies.
Anybody for horseback riding?
Get the fuck out of here. Oh hey, look, something a little more interesting. Not by much, mind you, but it's a more recent movie, made in 1982, during Italy's foray into exploitation, which immediately means there is more to point to for talking points.
And that could easily cause panic if it got to the general public.
Panic is an Italian/Spanish production about a scientist who's turned into a melting tumor after contaminated rats escape from a research facility.
The problem is the disappearance of the guinea pig.
Or guinea pigs. I mean, I know that's what you refer to test subjects as, but wouldn't lab rat also work? Whatever, that's semantics. Anyways, he goes around drinking people's blood, and the entire town is quarantined out of fear of his contamination spreading, as this guy, apparently he's named Captain Kirk, is tasked with finding and killing the monster. That doesn't stop him from touching all the blood at the crime scene. If anything, I'd only quarantine this guy. There are so many movies about quarantines made a long time ago that people often compare to what happened in 2020. But here, nobody else seems to really get infected because most of the time, the monster just rips them apart before they show any symptoms.
As far as we know, isn't Adams the only carrier of the virus?
Yes, since all his victims are dead.
The monster grabs and nearly kills at least 2 people, one of them being the protagonist, but it never really addresses whether that's enough for contamination.
You're wounded.
Oh, the monster's bleeding.
Also, why did this guy's girlfriend stay in the theater after the monster appeared? She wasn't even in the first row. Also, why is this couple making out in a dirty warehouse? The same warehouse the movie ends in, too, and is supposedly a different location. Ah, God. Italian movies. This movie incorporates elements of giallo, with all the shots of the killer's POV, but outside of that, I don't really think it does anything interesting visually. The camera is always situated far back from the action, so the film doesn't force the viewer to engage with the action outside of wides and mediums, and that's what I think primarily contributes to the boredom. If not the multiple scenes between monster kills of characters discussing how to stop it, or the near lack of incidental music, which is a shame because Italian movies at least usually have good music. There is a ticking time bomb element that's introduced in the climax, with the government trying to go all scorched earth on the town, despite not a single person showing the same symptoms as the single monster. But even that element is undermined by most of that climax being characters wandering around a sewer. There is no sense of space or indication that the monster is closer or further away from them, and it's just not very interesting to watch.
Do you think there's really any danger?
I doubt it, dear.
The gore isn't even that fun, but I guess the makeup of the mutated man is well done, and I can cling to that little detail when saying this movie isn't awful. It's a pretty standard man-turned-monster-on-the-loose movie, and there have definitely been worse in that category. The worst sin of this film is how dreadfully dull it can be. In Greece, the film was apparently released as Zombie 4, making this the unofficial fourth entry in that weird rabbit hole of a series. Alright, I'm going off script for a second because I feel like I need to explain this because I know there are people out there who don't know how fucked up the Zombie series is. Okay, so Dawn of the Dead was released in Italy as Zombie. About a year or less than a year later, Zombie 2 came out. Now this was a completely unrelated production, but because of Italian copyright law, they were allowed to call it Zombie 2. Now fast forward about 10 years, we have Zombie 3. This is also an unrelated movie, but whatever the case is, they finished that movie. That is allowed to be called Zombie 3. Then they made Zombie 4, which was directed by Claudio Fragasso. That was the guy who made Troll 2. That is also technically part of the series. Once we get to Zombie 5, that's when we get some real bizarre shit. Like, it wasn't actually Zombie 5. It is sometimes called Zombie 5, but the actual title is Killing Birds. Now, what gets really fucked up about this, what gets just absolutely fucked up about this, is that copyright law was just a suggestion apparently throughout the entire Mediterranean, so just anyone could call their movie a sequel to Zombie. For example, this movie is called Zombie 4 in Greece. Sometimes movies that were released before Dawn of the Dead were repackaged as zombie movies. The whole thing's a mess, and honestly, I think I should make a video about it. It's really funny. You know, this whole practice of incorrectly labeling movies reminds me of what bootleggers do when they slap random numbers on unrelated games to make them look like sequels. You know, Sonic Blast 5, 7 Granddad, etc. Anyways, that's all I really have to say about it. Moving on. Frankenstein 80. A movie released in 1972, okay, is another Italian production. Out of all the films I've talked about so far, this one is the most sexually explicit, and for sleazy reasons, so viewer discretion is advised. Like Lady Frankenstein, this isn't so much of an adaptation as it is a story that takes elements from the original Mary Shelley novel. It's fairly standard on a surface level. It's about Dr. Frankenstein making his monster out of stolen body parts. The monster is named Mosaic here. And this monster is a real bastard.
An ugly bastard.
It wanders around at night and specifically targets women. The reason the filmmakers chose this motivation is unfortunately self-explanatory. Eventually, the monster breaks from the Doctor's control, and then any semblance of a story gets thrown out the window as the creature goes on a killing spree. Frankie's a fraud here. He stole his serum from a guy named Dr. Schwartz. That and the fact that we don't really get a proper monster creation scene, just a monster completion scene, makes this a weirdly noteworthy adaptation, just for what it omits. That and the monster being, you know.
An ugly bastard.
Despite how I make it sound, this movie has a couple things going for it, even through this awful transfer. The bizarre lighting and camera work shine through. There are some nice-looking shots and creepy moments. It's just that, like the last movie I talked about, a lot of this one is spent looking for the monster, and a lot of that involves these largely uncharismatic characters. There's a bit of black comedy sprinkled in there, but it's nothing more than chuckle-worthy.
We've got to put them together, piece by piece.
Okay, there's one bit that's actually pretty funny.
And the murder that we have learned that just happened in the toilet.
It's an undoubtedly trashy movie, but it has some artistry to it. The music is pretty good. The makeup on the Frankenstein monster is subtly grotesque enough. and what he does makes him a suitably detestable villain. I just wish the movie didn't linger on it. And Gordon Mitchell delivers a nasally yet entertaining performance as Frankenstein.
You've now attacked me, and I shall have to destroy you.
Definitely not a movie for everyone, but aside from the slower parts and the perverted bits, I was entertained. Especially by the crappy death scenes at the end. That's some good schlock right there. There is a limited Blu-ray release of this movie coming out soon, so if you want to actually see this in a quality grade above VHS, then you might want to check that out. I personally will not be buying it, though.
What a load of crap. Pardon.
Okay, so change of plans. I accidentally forgot a movie in my initial lineup. So we're covering 31 movies now instead of 30. Oops. Anyways, Maneater of Hydra stars Cameron Mitchell, who I'm mostly familiar with being a repeat appearance on episodes of Red Letter Media's Best of the Worst series.
I get gas. Every day ends with a Tom's Festival.
This was before he reached peak slovenly drunkenness, however, being released during his sober years in 1967. So, Maneater of Hydra, or Island of the Doomed, is a Spanish/German co-production about, of course, a mad scientist, one played by Cameron Mitchell, who brings these largely characterless tourists to his private villa, which houses killer plants he has modified. It takes a while for much to happen, but it starts picking them off one by one, and it becomes a little murder mystery. One where it's obvious that the killer is a plant monster if you have any degree of genre savviness.
You mean you believe that one of my experiments got out of control and is responsible for these deaths?
There's a subplot about a married couple having a case of infidelity, and the lady is trying to hook up with almost every male in the group. Even the mad scientist. Hell, her name is Mrs. Robinson. Must have been a coincidence. Anyways, she dies.
A moment will do it. My bag isn't that antique car. I need it today.
Nobody here is really all that likable, especially not the adulteress. So there comes a point where I'm just rooting for the plants to start killing them. And that doesn't happen fast enough. The slow pacing should be predicated on characters the viewer likes, or is at the very least interested enough in them to want to see them uncover the mystery. A mystery that's fairly obvious. But the movie sets them up as whiny assholes, so it just becomes a more lethargic slasher movie without all the gruesome deaths. With the exception of the final 12 minutes. That's when we finally see the plant monster, and the way it offs the final characters is pretty sickening, for a movie of this scale at least. A lot of it is implied and off-screen, but it's effective. The sound design on it is pretty silly though. It sounds like someone doing raspberries. Yeah, Maneater of Hydra was pretty boring overall. The climax doesn't make the whole package worth it. It's notably a little gory for a film made in 1967, but it ain't worth watching, I think. Next movie. Frozen Alive. It's a movie from the 60s. The film is about two scientists doing experiments in freezing and resuscitating people, despite pushback from the scientific community. One of the two is married, despite showing interest in his scientific partner, but his wife is also seeing another man behind his back.
The plot thickens.
It's some trite drama between not terribly interesting people. The performances are generally decent, but I couldn't get invested here, especially when it took until the movie was 2/3 over to get to the Frozen Alive part of the Frozen Alive title, when one of the scientists offers to freeze himself, but then this happens.
Auf Wiedersehen to Joan the Soak.
His wife shoots herself, and it was with the scientist's gun too. So now there's some confusion on if he's freezing himself to escape murder when in reality the wife shot herself. Immediately the tone of this one is confused. It starts with swanky music set against a space backdrop. Space isn't even relevant to the movie, but I guess the groovy music is fitting, cause this isn't really much of a horror movie or a science fiction movie. It's a melodrama about a love cube that has a ton of setup before actually getting to the science fiction elements.
The weaker sex.
God, I really don't have much to say about this one. It's just not very interesting. The characters are stock and the drama is kinda dumb, because it all leads to this total misunderstanding, and it's one we, the audience, already know the solution to because we saw it. It feels like a waste of time. The climax of the movie is just the scientist waking up from being frozen just to say, yeah, I didn't do it. And that's it. I guess they proved their experiment works too, so, good for them. Now, this movie was a German-British co-production, so in Germany it had the title Case File Number 701, which certainly matches a movie this boring more than Frozen Alive. Next movie. Before I move on though, I want to say, now that we're halfway through the box set, that we could be doing worse. Sure, we've had a couple really bad movies so far, but some of the movies here are genuinely watchable, in a cult film sort of way. Not a lot of objective awfulness like in the science fiction box set. Let's see if things change. Wow, it's a movie in this collection that's not only in widescreen, but also in a different language. Usually in these collections, Mill Creek only puts in the English dub, but here we are with a French-Spanish co-production that's presented in its original language. Its inclusion is a win for foreign cinema, surely. But yeah, the movie itself is not really great. In a desperate attempt to save a robber's life after a botched bank heist, a group of criminals bring him to a scientist of the mild variety. They hold his wife and daughter hostage until the scientist can cure their friend. The movie is reasonable up until now, but I can determine the exact moment it got a little absurd.
Pour sauver cet homme, il faut pouvoir lui faire une greffe du cerveau.
It's not a complete brain transplant, the movie isn't that dumb, but they're taking portions of another man's brain and replacing the damaged tissue with that one. That other brain belonged to a criminal named the Sadist, who they kill with a silly-sounding silencer. Predictably, the brain of a much worse criminal results in complications right away. Who would have thunk that putting part of another man's brain in someone else could make them act like them? In fairness, the scientist did warn about this. Though, for a time, the movie does not focus on the consequences of this. It's more about building this scenario around the operation, with a gang of rival criminals holding the scientist's assistant hostage, wanting revenge for the death of the man whose brain was used. The movie is jumping around a lot, but still somehow a bit plotting. It's leaning harder on the crime drama than the science fiction, which is a bit disappointing. It's more of a horror movie than the straight-up crime dramas that were crammed on the horror box set, but I'm still getting flashbacks. Man, what is it with brain and head transplant movies and having the flick just stop for a burlesque club scene? The music of this film is pretty good at least. It sounds a lot like an Italian movie score, with the wailing woman acting as vocals. This movie isn't awful, but there really isn't a lot to it. The pacing makes it a bit dull, and the science fiction element is undercooked. That and the crime drama isn't all that interesting to watch. I had this one on in the background for a lot of it. Halfway through, it just wasn't grabbing me. I'd like to move on to the next movie. Man in the Attic is really stretching the definition of a mad scientist movie. Sure, it's got something of a doctor in it who's mad, but it's more of a murder mystery film. I'll excuse it because the movie itself is actually pretty good. Set in late 1800s London, a man named Slade, played by Jack Palance, takes up rent in a house's attic. He's a bit suspicious, and perhaps to further clue the audience into who he is, if his actor's first name wasn't already perfect casting, this movie is set during a certain killer's murder spree.
Jack the Ripper. What a revolting, stupid name.
This film is in the mystery genre, but it is pretty obvious Slade is Jack the Ripper. So that is something I'll knock against it. It's way too predictable.
That's odd, you know. He never does that with strangers.
It's also another one of those movies with a really long song and dance scene, despite not being a musical, and some of these lines are also kinda goofy.
I believe he's shy and lonely and all wrapped up in his Chinese puzzles.
And also hilariously dated.
Oh, she's so gay, even in the morning.
But this movie has a number of things going for it. The sets are lavish and suggest this is an actual studio production. They help give the movie a palpable atmosphere at times. The camera work and cutting are sophisticated and gives the numerous dialogue scenes a little more visual intrigue with wides, mediums, and close-ups. This is how you do these sorts of scenes and make them fun to watch. You can infer characterization from something as simple as a close-up. Take notes, Jerry. Jack Palance is also quite good in the role. He's playing the part of Jack the Ripper with a reserved mania where it's clear he's not totally trustworthy, but he's also suave enough to a point where he might not be a crazy killer. And it's played well. Dialogue like this is a huge red flag though.
My mother was an actress. She was one of the most angelically beautiful women who ever lived. I loved her deeply. For every aspect of beauty she possessed, she contained a double portion of evil. I hated her.
But I thought you said you loved her.
The fact that it's so on the nose and only the lady tenant suspects anything at first is groan-worthy. But yeah, aside from some issues with the predictability of the screenplay, this movie is quite decent. It's got some genuine production value. The performances, especially from Jack Palance, are good, and the camera work and editing add a lot. How the heck did a movie like this end up on this box set?
What did you say, dear?
I was talking to the dog.
Okay, let's make this one quick. Counterblast is a 1948 low-budget British film. One of the first shots of the film is an enigma. It looks like these guys are jumping into the air like friggin', I don't know, Mario. While the hideous transfer doesn't make it immediately obvious, this is supposed to be a prison break being done by ex-German officers. Taking place in a post-war Britain, one of the escaped officers, a bacteriologist named Bruckner, slips into society by violently taking the place of another doctor. Once he settles in, he continues his dastardly work by developing bacteria-based bioweapons.
Yes, bacterial warfare. Any man who dabbles in that sort of thing commits a crime against humanity.
The rest of the movie follows a couple of other characters slowly catching on to the scientist's lie, and he begins to have doubts about his beliefs. Though, don't get it twisted, he's not a layered enough character for him to not default to his evil beliefs in the end. The fact that it's a movie made so soon after World War II that has a villain protagonist in the form of an ex-German scientist is a little interesting, I guess. But it's a movie that's padded front to back, not a premise begging for an hour and 38 minutes. The performances here are generally decent, if not a bit stuffy and unnatural.
Will you excuse me? I'll get some cigarettes. That's very kind of you, Dr. Rankin.
The whole relationship subplot with Bruckner's assistant is overly saccharine and corny. The filmmaking is functional. Nothing spectacular, but there are little moments I can point to as being particularly effective. I like how the tension in this scene builds and builds with the diegetic music and the lady being unaware of Bruckner's intents, until finally...
I said I don't want to drink.
That's good, I like that. It is reasonably watchable, if not a dry experience. And I say watchable in regards to the movie itself, not this transfer. Good lord, is it ugly. The story is kinda interesting and does about as much as it can do with its budget while remaining mildly engaging. Because this was made after World War II, there are occasional moments where they address the trauma that came from it, but I don't think they dwell on it enough. The pacing is definitely on the slower side, but I feel like that opinion is more influenced by the want to see the next movie. Speaking of, let's move on to the next movie. Our final movie of the night is I Eat Your Skin. Why does it have such a title? Well, because it was the second in a double bill with one of the catchiest title card readouts I've ever heard.
I drink your blood, and I eat your skin.
Man, the way the trailer voice says it, it's just instantly iconic.
I drink your blood, and I eat your skin.
You know what? Fuck it. I'm never going to have another opportunity to talk about I Drink Your Blood, so I'm throwing in a bonus review. I'll talk about I Eat Your Skin next, I just want to take a quick detour. We're looking at 32 movies now instead of 31. Full disclosure to address the people listening to this video in another tab, yes you. I Drink Your Blood is not part of this collection. I just want to talk about it because of its past as a companion piece to the final movie here. And I mean, it's got a kid in it who injects rabies into meat pies. He could be considered a mad scientist if you want.
Let it be known, sons and daughters, that Satan was an acid head.
A group of hippie Satanists make a small town their new residence. After harassing an old man to tears, his grandson takes blood from a rabid dog and injects it into the aforementioned meat pies, which are then served to the Satanists. Slowly but surely, they all succumb to rabies and all hell breaks loose. I guess even by today's standards, we've seen much worse, but the movie was given an X rating on violence alone. So trust me when I say I Drink Your Blood goes off the goddamn rails. It's a weird blend of elements, a whole group of Satanists with defining character traits, with a small town, with construction workers, with rabies. All these disparate elements eventually collide and create an entertaining final act. All of this happened because a kid injected rabies into meat pies.
Rabies? You mean like dogs?
The cult leader is just an absolute joy to watch. He's chewing the scenery with every line and just reveling in it.
You're beautiful, but if you ain't careful, I'm gonna skin your ass alive.
Everyone in this group of Satanists looks like they're having a great time. They're all delivering their lines like it's a dramatic stage production, and it adds a delightful layer of cheese to the proceedings.
You're mad, you son of a bitch!
They do some pretty twisted things before they even go rabid. They go rat hunting in one of the movie's early visceral scenes, and one of the first things they do in the film is slit a live chicken's neck. The rat hunt is fine. Apparently no rats were hurt or at least killed on screen, but the chicken was definitely a live animal they killed for the movie, and it's less than 4 minutes in. Talk about a barrier for entry. On a lighter note, the writing is surprisingly funny at times.
We'll make a baker out of you yet, Kate. Nope, I'm gonna be a veterinarian.
I especially enjoy how certain elements are set up early on, as a sort of fucked up Chekhov's gun.
Just like shish kebab.
The score is this eclectic mix of grungy electric guitar stings and high-pitched early synth noises. It's a unique soundscape for a film, and it works, especially the one-note noises being sustained and slightly raised as the tension mounts. I Drink Your Blood is a bit of a hard sell if you're not into cult cinema, but this is as quintessentially cult as it gets. Hell, it's got a cult in it. It takes a bit to get the ball rolling, but it's crazy, it's campy, and genuinely squeamish. I think it's an enjoyable time. If this movie was on this box set, it would easily be one of the best. It's the grisly film you want to open a double feature with. I Eat Your Skin, on the other hand, is the movie you put on when you want people to leave.
Oh no, there's my husband!
If you're wondering why this movie is in black and white while the other was in color, that's because this one was shot in the early to mid-60s but remained uncompleted until the double feature. Even the film's double feature trailer only shows clips from I Drink Your Blood. They knew which one was the creaky old stinker. No skin is actually eaten in the film either, which is something that is addressed on the Wikipedia page. Sure, no blood was consumed during I Drink Your Blood, but at least they made up for it with its own violence. This is an older piece of crap that was dressed up in marketing to sound like an exploitation film. Though it does have some exploitationist themes, like voodoo zombies. So, the film is about a novelist who's assigned to cover a story in the Caribbeans about ritualistic sacrifices. As it turns out, scientists there are using these rituals as a cover to turn people into zombies. And they're some of the worst zombies ever. Like, seriously, they're supposed to be decomposing, but they clearly have mud slapped on their face, and I mean, what do you even say about the eyes? Are they in a perpetual state of seeing booba? Are these the long-lost cousins of the aliens from Killers from Space? Even those eyes were more convincing. One of the lead scientists was trying to find a cure for cancer, too. How the fuck did he accidentally make zombies? The main character isn't terribly compelling. He's the womanizing type, and the whole motivation for going to the island was the promise that there would be virgin girls there.
Baby, did you miss me?
This feels like a movie that was attempted to be salvaged in editing, and what was there was barely usable. The film's score is also quite intrusive and ill-fitting. It's made up of groovy jazz music, maybe in an attempt to liven it up. It doesn't work. The script is still awful and its story plodding. Check out the sound design on this snake. It's clearly someone going sss into the mic. The single funny moment in the film has to be the scene where a zombie carries explosives and walks into a plane. That's some creative shit right there, but it doesn't save the film. Most voodoo zombie movies I've seen are from these box sets, and with the exception of one, they've all been fucking miserable, boring movies. I Eat Your Skin joins their ranks. It was woefully outdated with its voodoo zombies even at the time it was shot. It's shot flatly, and its attempts to charm with the main character only repulse. It misses the mark of being an entertaining bad movie. I think it's just bad. At least the recent Blu-ray release looks nice. I'm not using the visuals from the Mill Creek DVD because they look like they survived a hydrogen bomb. So you can experience this turd with high quality video if, like, you hate yourself, I guess. The Manster is a 1959 American monster movie that was actually shot in Japan, which is a little intriguing for a movie from the 50s.
But sometimes it frightens me. Good.
A reporter named Stanford travels up the side of a mountain in Japan to meet with a doctor conducting experiments on mutations. We already know the doctor is up to no good because the cold open established that he created a monkey monster that murdered some people in a hot springs. After Stanford is unknowingly injected with some kooky concoction, he quickly starts exhibiting his worst traits, and over time he begins to morph into something else. He's half man and half monster. You could say he's become a manster. I feel like the big problem with how this movie handles the forced fall from grace is that we don't spend a lot of time with Stanford before he becomes an asshole. At most, we know he's a guy who can't wait to see his wife again, but the scene right after is him being unfaithful. Keep in mind this is presumably less than 12 hours after the injection, and it's unclear whether that's something he would have done had he not been injected with the serum. That's why it's so hard to connect with the guy. We know him as Jerk Larry for longer than we know him as Nice Larry. And even when he's Nice Larry, he still flirts with another woman. I think that's why Larry Talbot is a great example of this kind of tortured character being done well. Becoming the Wolfman didn't turn him into a raging asshole during the daytime, which allowed us to sympathize with him better as he rightfully expressed his frustrations with the curse. Hell, Stanford's name is also Larry. You'd think the filmmakers would have taken a couple lessons. When his wife confronts him, it's more like catharsis.
Hello, Larry.
The movie may have been going for a theme here, but it's not illustrated very well.
What else do you want? The illusion of respectability? All right, if that's what you want, I'll marry you.
It doesn't help that the film's script is pretty goofy. It makes it hard to take the drama seriously.
What the devil's gotten into him lately?
I don't know. Maybe it's what you just said. The devil's gotten into him.
That and the theremin whenever Larry experiences pain from the transformation. And yeah, the empathy isn't really there. So you're just watching this mean guy become a monster and like, yeah, it's watchable. In fact, the makeup and special effect scenes are quite decent. The first scene where the monster emerges from Stanford's shoulder is quite effective. It's well lit and hides the imperfections. The weird lady the Doctor keeps in his basement looks convincing enough too. You gotta keep the era these films were produced in mind when judging their effects quality. And of the films made around this time, I think the effects here are average, above average. Though, seeing this two-headed guy run around in wide shots adds a layer of unintended comedy to the whole thing. And there's a lot of it in the final act. The highlight of the film has to be the final scene where Larry separates from his evil half. It becomes a monkey man. It's fun. It also conveniently disposes of Larry's mistress, so the film doesn't have to actually confront his infidelity. Really swept that one under the rug, guys. It's not awful, I was entertained, but there's simply no emotional core to the thing. Not a bad way to start the video, though. Our final Frankenstein movie of the box set, it's a western/horror movie, and it's a bad one at that. Who would have thought a movie with the title Jesse James Meets Frankenstein's Daughter would be bad? The first sign is right there in the title. Frankenstein's daughter? You mean Frankenstein? Why the specificity? It's not even accurate. This movie is about Frankenstein's granddaughter. They couldn't even get that right.
He's been shot.
Well, he was cleaning his gun.
Anyways, said granddaughter, Maria Frankenstein, is a cartoonishly evil woman whose experiments in reviving the dead have significantly whittled away the population of a Mexican village. How evil is she? Well, up until now, she's been using the brains of children instead of grown adults.
It's because we've been forced to use the brains of children that we've failed. What we need is a man.
So she needs the body of a big brute, which she finds with the big dumb sidekick of Jesse James. Well, not right away. There's a bit more setup where Jesse gets involved in a stagecoach heist. It's pretty much a subpar western for a while, until it turns into a subpar horror movie.
Jesse, look out!
Even Native Americans show up. Everyone's favorite and definitely not poorly aged western movie trope. Anyways, Jesse brings his big dumb friend to Frankenstein's home in the hopes she will cure him of the getting shot in the stomach a whole day ago disease. Like seriously, this guy takes a comically long time to bleed out. He eventually gets converted into the film's Frankenstein monster, and he's certainly a design. It's literally just a guy with stitching on his head. They did not try with the monster here. They try to tie it further to the Frankenstein mythos by naming him Igor, but like, that's not even accurate to the original story.
Get him, Igor! Get him!
There's also this subplot about this lady being infatuated with Jesse James, and the whole thing is badly written and hard to watch. She wants to fix him, but he's already too long gone. Even Frankenstein tries to cozy up to Jesse. How is this guy such a chick magnet? He has the charisma of sandpaper. It's poorly acted, shot flatly to such a degree that it never excites or scares visually, and it's silly in ways they never intended. It almost barely makes for a good bad movie night film. Like, seriously, this is the guy's eulogy. It's incredible.
Kill Juanita. Kill her. Kill Juanita. Kill Juanita. Kill Juanita.
If you've watched Cinemassacre's Monster Madness, you've probably heard of this one. The Phantom Creeps is a film edit of a serial starring Bela Lugosi as Dr. Zorka, hell-bent on world domination, and the edit itself is of dubious quality.
Remotely controlled. You could crush all up.
This is a Universal joint too, so it has a bit of the production value you would expect from one of their monster movies. To an extent. This production value can be seen in Dr. Zorka's arsenal of weapons, such as a mechanical spider that follows a magnetic disc and explodes when it makes contact and makes its target go into suspended animation for some reason, a belt that makes him invisible, a Z-ray where anyone who's hit by it gets, quote, impregnated with this invisible gas and dies, And finally, a giant robot with a demon baby face. It's goofy, yet it's become iconic imagery in its own way. Some of the special effects are pretty hokey though. This is an edit of a 4-hour-long serial, so the pacing is about as messed up as you would expect. Conflicts are introduced and almost immediately resolved. Everything moves way too fast, but the serial's zaniness still shines through. All of those aforementioned weapons, for example. Most infamously, the serial resorts to some of the most insensitive use of stock footage ever. When a blimp gets taken down, they show footage of the Hindenburg disaster. The modern-day equivalent would be like if an Asylum movie used footage of 9/11. It's fucked up. That aside, there's a lot of insanity crammed into these 78 minutes. The cast is largely unremarkable, but Bela Lugosi is as fun as always. And the crazy things that happen are pretty unpredictable. It's not non-stop fun, but it's an overall enjoyable time. Had it on in the background, it was a passive watch. Don't Look in the Basement, aside from being what I say to my guests, is a 1973 low-budget independent horror movie about a new nurse in a private sanitarium having to deal with its unrestrained patients. What makes this one an alleged mad scientist movie is that there's a doctor at the very beginning who believes that having mental patients play into their lunacy is the path to curing them. We don't learn that until later when we get the explanation from this lady, because the mad scientist is killed less than 6 minutes into the film. He gave a mental patient an axe. That was all on him. The cast here is wild and varied. Standouts include a woman who thinks a doll is her baby, a man with the mind of a child, a sergeant who thinks there's still a war, the accidental axe murderer who considers himself judge, jury, and executioner, and the prerequisite scary old lady.
Do you get out often?
It's you who need to get out.
Even the head nurse is a nutcase. The film takes a while to set all the characters up, and for a time, the plot meanders without much of a direction. It's a detriment to the film, but tonally, it kinda fits. It's like the screenplay was written by the people in the house. With the directing and tight close-ups and surprisingly solid performances, it can be effectively uncomfortable. Eventually, something does happen. The meandering finally amounts to some action, and everyone is a suspect. There is a sadness to the characters in this movie, and each has an internal logic that's understandable and sympathetic. I do think the film didn't need to go as far with them as it did in the final scene. It essentially turns all but one into savage monsters, but it does at least end the film on a high note. It's undoubtedly not the most refined production, the audio was all recorded on set, and the pacing is serving a story that feels aimless as it sets up all these disparate elements that finally add up to something in the last act. But the filmmaking is somewhat sophisticated. Plenty of inventive shots, wild performances, and it has an uncomfortable atmosphere throughout. It's a sweaty and weird little flick. I liked it. The kind of grimy grindhouse cinema this collection desperately needed more of. I can't wait for more movies like this to fall into the public domain.
Good night, Sergeant.
Embryo is a 1976 film starring a late-career Rock Hudson, and it's got a very intriguing premise. Dr. Paul Holliston is experimenting with the rapid growth of fetuses in the hopes of using his scientific breakthrough to save miscarriages. When he experiments on a human fetus, it grows rapidly against his intent until he finds a sort of antidote to slow the process down, stopping as the embryo reaches adulthood. This is the kind of intrigue I'm looking for in science fiction. Out there concepts that make the viewer wonder, what if? What are the moral and ethical implications of growing a human being in a lab? The scientist's droll narration even notes a couple things. This embryo lady, Victoria, wasn't held down by the same environmental restrictions the rest of us have. She was an embryo over 4 weeks ago, though the claim that she's using 100% of her brain is a little ridiculous. And see, this is where the cracks in the film start to show. They brush over too much. Victoria is able to read sometime later in her development, but after that, she doesn't recognize that flowers aren't edible? And the leaps in logic taken with her character only get worse from there. They also have a habit of telling and not showing. There's this whole sequence where Victoria went out in public for the first time, but it's recounted through ADR.
It was all exciting and beautiful, but sometimes I felt I said the wrong things or asked the wrong question.
She's also highly intelligent for someone born 4 weeks ago, meaning she's more knowledgeable about facts than human emotion. It does result in an entertaining scene where she beats a Roddy McDowell cameo in chess.
I've never played. I've only read books. I've never played. I've only read books.
You let me win! Oh! She let me win! Nobody lets me win! Get me out of here!
But rather than further explore the concepts it puts forth, it leaves the viewer to mentally ask these questions, while the movie itself instead pursues something more by the numbers. It turns out the rapid growth hormone also makes the subject more aggressive. And we first see that in this hilarious scene where the Doberman embryo turns another dog into a plushie. This can be seen to some degree in Victoria, who begins to dispose of people on the verge of discovering her origin, in addition to taking pituitary gland liquid from unborn babies to stop her rapid aging, which is resumed, of course. It's contrived, and I hate to admit it lost me because the premise was so interesting. Things really take a turn for the weird when Victoria wants to have sex with the doctor, an offer he accepts. Which, I don't know, man, that's kinda fucked up. He raised her like she was a child. The film initially treats this like it's a romantic thing too. The doctor has the prerequisite dead wife, so maybe he's trying to fill the void, but that and the fact that she still has childish tendencies just makes it more fucked up. The film set up a couple other guys as romantic interests, and I mean, that would be bad too, but at least it wouldn't have been her guardian. Point is, she's pregnant now. The opportunities to explore potentially interesting concepts feel squandered in favor of a story that moves along at a rather slow pace and isn't very interesting. I was kinda engaged throughout, but it's not a particularly well-sustained film. It has an interesting premise, but it only takes the film so far because the execution is lacking. It has decent acting, cool ideas, but it's rather meandering. It's due for a remake.
I'll call you from Minneapolis.
At first glance, Son of Ingagi is pretty unique for its time. It was written by and starred an all-black cast, which was unheard of in 1940. But having an all-black cast is one thing. Depending on how it was produced and directed, it could still be very dated. I'm 125 movies into these box sets. I've gotta be careful. Well, having just seen it, I can tell you it's, luckily, mostly dated in the writing, pacing, and acting sense.
I think that would be lovely.
Hey, is it normal to start dancing to no music?
The party is on. Well, what are we waiting for?
Okay, so anyways, the film is about an evil witch, who's actually a mad scientist, because of course she is, who brings back a big hairy creature from Africa. It eventually kills the witch and terrorizes anyone who steps into his house for the rest of the movie. It's really no more simple than that. The movie is barely over an hour long and kinda follows uninteresting characters, and the monster appears on occasion. For a movie with an all-black cast, there sure is a lot of white noise. The lack of music is almost deafening. The general filmmaking is pretty uninteresting too. It's a lot more like a stage play, with many scenes being long takes of the camera, positioned far back from the actors as they recite their lines. There is this one bit which is kinda awkward, but struck me as, you know, it's something. They were doing something here. It's the total lack of music that really hurts this one. It makes things way more awkward than it should be. Well, anyways, this is a pretty tepid little monster movie. It's got historical significance for being one of the first all-black monster movies, but that's kinda it. The movie itself is bad. Next film, please. The New Zealand Film Commission seemed pretty chill in the 80s. They let Peter Jackson make some absurdly violent horror films, and here comes a film from 1984 that came before all of his and is pretty violent in its own right. Death Warmed Up. I guess it would be pronounced Death Warmed Up over there.
He looked like death warmed up.
The mad scientist of this one, Dr. Archer Howell, is proper mad. He believes that the dead can be revived, and part of his plan includes injecting this poor guy directly into his ass, briefly turning him into a zombie slave who goes after the doctor's scientific enemies. Oh, hey, nice boom mic. Not exactly sure what that accomplished, but 7 years pass and the guy he injected, Michael, has finally been released from an insane asylum, while the doctor is now practicing zombie brain surgery and running for office. Michael wants revenge for the unjust incarceration. Allegedly. He kinda dicks around with his friends for the first half and stumbles into the mad scientist's plans. Parts of this movie screams, "Watches Mad Max once." The zombie characters are dressed up like post-apocalypse punks, and they chase our main characters in a couple motorized vehicles. It's derivative, but it adds a dumb fun energy to the film. The camera work of this one is wild and loose. I can appreciate how it seems to be handheld but still smooth. The energy it gives the film's action scenes is undeniable. Is that the Taco Bell sound effect? The story of this one is needlessly meandering, and the music sounds like it came directly from a bad Sega Genesis game. But the script is delightfully corny.
Where are you taking us? I'm taking you down to hell, boy.
The gore is exquisitely brutal too, and the camera work is a lot of fun. It's almost total nonsense for 71 minutes, but it's enjoyable nonsense when you can see it. I hate to keep beating this drum, but the visual quality is quite poor in this collection. This movie was apparently banned in Australia for its violence, and let's be real, what hasn't been banned in Australia?
Another mystical experience.
So here's the fun part about Invasion of the Bee-Girls. I can't talk about it on YouTube. The subject matter is a little too risque, and I couldn't really find a way to talk about it without addressing the risque elements. And I want this video to stay monetized, and I think this movie would push it over the edge of monetization. But if you want to see the review, I will make the uncensored version of this video free on my Patreon. You can check it out there if you really want to. Anyways, let's move on to the next movie. Our penultimate film of this series is Metamorphosis, which is also the latest film of this collection, being released in 1990, not to be confused with Metamorphosis, the Alien Factor, which was also released in 1990, which isn't to be confused with The Alien Factor, directed by Don Dohler and released in 1978, which got a sequel in 2001 titled Alien Factor 2: The Alien Rampage. Metamorphosis is not to be confused with any of those. A guy who looks like Christopher Reeve and acts like Patrick Bateman is a struggling geneticist and faces the loss of his funding after too many failed experiments. So, and I hope you saw this coming from a mile away because I sure did, out of desperation he experiments on himself. The injection makes him better at sports, more sexually aggressive, and slowly turns him into a dinosaur. If you've seen the 1986 Fly remake with Jeff Goldblum, it's like that, but worse. There's even a scene where he checks the computer for anomalies in the experiment. So his hypothesis is that if someone were to become an ageless being, the environment will reward them, but it will also be drained of its resources. So he wants to create something that's ageless, but doesn't do that. It's a bit lost in its writing. There is a mildly interesting element where the protagonist blacks out and has to retrace his steps to figure out what he did the night before and why people are reacting so negatively to him. But I think what doesn't work about this is that the guy just isn't that likable to begin with. From the beginning, he's a bit of a pompous asshole. If anything, him turning into a cold-blooded lizard guy is just the next step. It doesn't have an emotional core to it like The Fly. The movie also sees him starting a relationship with this lady, and that's an attempt to give the movie something to cling to, but the movie doesn't show them spending enough time together. I just don't care about what happens to these characters. The highlight of the movie is the ending. I don't really care about spoiling it, but he turns into a fucking dinosaur. Like, he was turning into one beforehand, but I didn't expect him to go full T-Rex. And after that, he gets reduced to a tiny lizard. It's fucking bizarre. Still a better design than the lizard from The Amazing Spider-Man. Not a very good movie, but not terrible either. Horror Express is a 1972 Spanish horror movie that I've been excited to talk about ever since I've had the idea for these box set videos. Its presence here is dubious though. There are scientists in the film, but I wouldn't call them mad. It's in the public domain, but it's one of those movies that probably fell into it by complete accident, rather than the rights holders just being disinterested. Because this is a genuinely good, if not campy movie.
How do you explain it not writing on that crate?
Hypnosis, yoga.
A grumpy anthropologist, Dr. Saxton, played by former Dracula and future sorcerer Christopher Lee, discovers the frozen body of a Neanderthal-like creature, and he embarks via train to have it further analyzed in England. It turns out the creature is alive, but there's more to it than that. It's actually the host body of an alien from prehistoric times, and it's capable of frying and taking information from the brains of whoever it makes eye contact with, in addition to being able to swap bodies. In essence, it's a take on The Thing, but set on a train.
The Unholy One is among us.
There are many zany characters on this Express to Hell. There's a scientist, a rival doctor to Saxton played by Peter Cushing, a duchess, and a mad monk. Dr. Saxton is a bit of an asshole, but he's just one of many characters to follow here.
I have heard of evolution. It's immoral.
It's a fact. And there's no morality in a fact.
I enjoy the interactions in this cast.
There's a scientific explanation.
You know it?
No.
Peter Cushing as Lee's friend and rival is, needless to say, quite good in this too. Generally speaking, they both work well together, no matter the movie. He's got some memorable lines too.
What if one of you is the monster?
Monster? They're British, you know.
Telly Savalas plays a Slavic inspector who is introduced late into the film, and he really leaves an impression.
Beware the wrath of Satan.
In execution, maybe the film is a little goofy. The creature's blood is used to view memories, and for some reason he retains his hairy arm when he swaps bodies. I think the looser rules are more applicable when it's an alien from outer space. I enjoy this collision of horror with out-there sci-fi concepts. It's fun, and it goes off the rails in the best way. Train joke entirely intended. An actual contrivance is the monk character, who is raving against the evil of Satan at the start of the film, and is now suddenly wanting to help him. It just doesn't make any sense. The music of this film is great, the main theme at least. It's played throughout, and it's diegetic for whatever reason, but it's a nice melody. There's a bit of sadness that it adds to the film's monster. All it wants to do is return to space. If we're considering this as an actual adaptation of the original Who Goes There novella, then this Thing is really the first one with actual characterization. He's essentially a more dimensional character, having expressed wants to go back to outer space. There's no mystery about who he's pretending to be either. We follow this thing throughout the movie, so he's almost sympathetic.
Can gravity be overcome?
But yeah, Horror Express is great stuff. Definitely not flawless in execution, it's a little schlocky, but the music is catchy, the performances are great, it can be genuinely spooky, the blend of horror and sci-fi really works, and its pacing is almost like that of a modern film. It just moves along from set piece to set piece at blistering speed, and it just feels right. It's easily one of, if not the best film in this box set. I'm quite fond of it. I have now covered every movie in the box set. I'm really tired. If you ignore the 20 leftover films from the science fiction and horror collection, most of them being crap, and if you don't mind every movie here looking like it was thrown in a microwave for a minute, this is a pretty unique collection of oddities that's worth buying. I mean, you could also just watch them on YouTube since they're all either public domain or cheap to license, and whatever version's been uploaded online is likely in better quality. But if you want Bela Lugosi's ape makeup to grace your collection, this fits that niche, you weirdo. I'll be taking another extended break from these box set videos, and I can't make any promises, but maybe look forward to another one of these this October. Thanks for watching till the end.